Hello, Law family. Another week of Gentle and Lowly. And this week we're going to turn a little bit. We've been talking about the heart and the character of Christ as we've gone through this book. But this week and next, there's kind of a pause and we look at the other two persons of the Trinity, which this is a topic I really love. And it's one that I've been studying actually this past week in one of my seminary classes. So I'll try not to get too nerdy on you. But there's a reason that we have to talk about the Trinity when we're talking about Christ. And that's because when we think about Trinitarian theology, the nature of the Trinity is that the three persons of the Trinity are so interwoven with one another. The church has long affirmed this concept through, one aspect is through the Nicene Creed. And the Nicene Creed declares a belief in a triune God. So one God in three persons. One person is not subordinate to or less than another, but all persons in the Trinity participate in the creative and the sanctifying work of God. So this triune God is eternally and fundamentally relational in God's very nature. So we can't understand one person of the Trinity without talking about the others. So this week we're looking at the Holy Spirit. So the passage from the chapter this week is from John 14:16-17. I'm going to read that. It says, "I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate to be with you forever. This is the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive because it neither sees him nor knows him. You know him because he abides with you and he will be in you." So the Greek word for spirit in this passage, as you might know, is pneuma, which means breath. Breath has no material substance, right? It's not something you can measure. It's not something you can touch or you can create, but breath is the sustaining life, the sustaining source of life. And when the Nicene Creed talks about the Holy Spirit, it calls the Holy Spirit the Lord and the giver of life. So when we think about this life-giving work of the Holy Spirit, we see this all throughout the scope, the arch of the biblical narrative. It starts at the very beginning in Genesis when it says that God hovered over the waters. This is the Spirit, the life-giving source at the start of creation. We also see this life-giving work in Jesus Christ. It says that the Spirit is the source of the conception of Jesus in Mary's womb. We see the Spirit descend on Christ during his baptism. And then the Spirit is the active work behind the resurrection after Christ dies, which we get to celebrate on Sunday. So the incredible thing is that this life-giving Spirit is also at work in our own lives. When I think about this life-giving work, I think about it as something not that we do, but simply something that we receive. So when I think about my own relationship with the Holy Spirit, I have to be honest that this has not been, I would say, a familiar presence in much of my life and faith. My upbringing in the church, I would say, sort of lent itself for me to being either intellectual about my faith or sort of like a faith that was based on effort. But over time, particularly in the last few years, I've wrestled with some really deep questions about God. And through that wrestling, I have been encouraged to explore, instead of spiritual disciplines, exploring spiritual practices, and particularly the type of practices that put me into a posture of just receiving. I have a spiritual director that I work with, and some of the things that she has encouraged me to do is things like contemplative prayer, sitting in silence. She even talked to me about hospitality, how hospitality is a practice that you can do, but that it is also just as formative to receive hospitality. So through that process, I have started to discover that you cannot manufacture the work of the Spirit. You cannot create it, right? It's just something that you get to bear witness to, that you get to respond to. So this week, and even right now, as I can see my kids playing in the front yard, the wind is out of control, right? I was sitting at the Target waiting for my pickup and I could feel my car like rocking back and forth, like trying to, hang on with the brakes as the wind is going. And I was sitting there yesterday and I was watching the wind just going crazy as I was thinking about the Holy Spirit. And I thought, man, is that an image for it or what? the Holy Spirit is already at work, right? God is moving in our world. He's moving in our lives. And all you have to do to participate in that is to just submit to it, right? Just to submit to it. But in order for us to see what the Holy Spirit is doing, that requires us to be still long enough to hear it, to see it, to feel it. I have to be able to sit long enough that I can get into that posture of realizing that my identity, that my value and my belovedness is not in what I do, but it's simply in who I am, in the fact that I am simply and beautifully and quite frankly, miraculously a child of God. So I want to close with just a brief passage from the book that we're reading, Gentle and Lowly, from this week's chapter, from Dane Ortland. He writes, "The Spirit makes the heart of Christ real to us, not just heard, but seen, not just seen, but felt, and not just felt, but enjoyed. The Spirit takes what we read in the Bible and believe on paper about Jesus' heart and moves it from theory to reality, from doctrine to experience." So friends, that is my prayer for you this week, especially as we move through Holy Week with the anticipation of the celebration of Easter on Sunday. It's that you will find space to be still in God's presence, aware of the Holy Spirit, and that you will be renewed by the giver of life. So have a great week, friends. I'm praying for you, and I look forward to connecting with you soon.